Hello there. Dr. Weir was a skilled diplomat, skills she would need in her administration of the Atlantis expedition being isolated in Pegasus Galaxy. She would use these skills that she had honed over many years as a diplomat on Earth, plus the brief time she was in charge of Stargate Command, to help forge new allies in the Pegasus Galaxy, as well as keep the peace on the Atlantis base, with so many people being isolated so far from home for such a prolonged period of time under such stressful circumstances. During her time in command of Atlantis, she would oversee various missions and experiments, including but not limited to the creation of a retrovirus that was used to convert a wraith into a human by removing the genetic structure of the Eratus bug from which the wraith were descended, whose ancient ancestors had fed upon humans and absorbed their DNA, ultimately resulting in the evolution of the wraith. This was believed by some human doctors to mean that the wraith existed in an unnatural state. One of the more abstract parts of Dr. Elizabeth Weir's history was actually from an alternate timeline, where a version of herself that originally came to Atlantis that discovered that the city was not sustainable would travel back in time, meeting the ancients. She would then go into cryostasis after the ancients put in place a program that would mean that if the city was in danger of losing its shield and power and being lost, it would automatically raise back to the surface. But she had to remain in stasis for many centuries to keep rotating the 0-point module's power energy output to mean that the city would last long enough in order for her future self and team members to safely arrive at the city. Other exploits would include early dealings with the Genii, which, although rough at first as the Genii was something of a xenophobic and quite hostile power, they would ultimately result in a peaceful alliance with the Genii people. Another not so successful negotiation would take place when they would encounter the Azurans, who at first they believed to be the Ancients, but would later discover that they were a sort of mechanical offshoot of the Ancients, machines created by the Ancients millennia ago to fight the Wraith in a failed experiment, which the Ancients tried to wipe the replicators out, but they had rebuilt. The Azurans had no interest in an alliance with humans, or in helping them to fight the Wraith. They'd fought the Wraith, and simply didn't see it as their fight. This would regrettably lead to hostilities with the Azurans, which would, in turn, lead to Dr. Weir suffering critical injuries after an Azuran attack on the city of Atlantis left her almost dead. Her life would be saved, however, ironically, using residual nanites in her body from her last encounter with the replicators, or Azurans as they were known in the Pegasus Galaxy. This would be the beginnings of a new destiny for Dr. Weir, as she would ultimately end up becoming a replicator. Although at first her fate was believed that she had died, being killed by the Azurans, sacrificing herself so that others could escape, it was ultimately learned that this was not the case. When, after the destruction of the Azuran homeworld, Weir was seen in charge of an Aurora-class warship moving through the debris field of the destroyed Azuran homeworld, and is heard to say, "Now we can finally get to work without looking over our shoulders." Later, Weir, followed by other disembodied replicators, would reappear at Atlantis, having somewhat ascended, or at least from a replicator perspective, to a non-physical form. But learning that this form was little more than a living nightmare, they were looking for a way to get back into a physical body. Downloading herself into the Atlantis computers, she was able to build a new body, but the only one to hand was that of a previous replicator form created in Atlantis known as Fran. Having convinced Colonel Shepard and Mr. Woolsey that she was Dr. Weir, she convinced them to help her and the other replicators get organic bodies so they could seek ascension. But due to a troublesome member of her group causing havoc on Atlantis, she came to realize that they were a threat, even if they didn't intend to be. And she lured the remaining replicators off Atlantis for the safety of everyone else through a space gate, ultimately destroying them all. The last that was seen of her was she was drifting in space and she closed her eyes. On screen, this is the last known fate of Dr. Elizabeth Weir. Here's the bit that's up to the fan. There are more mentions of Dr. Elizabeth Weir in the what may or may not be, again depending on the individual fan, I think, more canonical appearances of Dr. Weir in book form in the Stargate Atlantis Legacy series. In these books, Dr. Weir does return and was aided in her ascension by an ascended Asgard. She saved the life of Dr. McKay and was then forcibly returned to mortal form. But it really does depend on whether or not you consider these to be canon or not, as some of the books and comics contradict one another as to why Atlantis returned to the Pegasus Galaxy and what happened afterwards.